The sea is a world of its own, a vast, unforgiving expanse that has swallowed countless lives and stories. Beneath the gentle lull of the waves lies something far darker, something that calls out from the depths. Tonight, we travel back to a time when sailors guided themselves by lighthouses, beacons of safety. But this is no ordinary lighthouse. This is a place where the light never stops burning, where shadows stretch across the sea, whispering warnings long ignored. Welcome to Eilean Mòr, an isolated island off the coast of Scotland. Here, in the remote Forgotten Isles, a small lighthouse stands, keeping watch over the restless sea. But in December of 1900, the men who tended this lighthouse, 3 experienced keepers, disappeared. They vanished, leaving no trace behind. The mystery has haunted historians and sailors alike for over a century. Tonight, we enter the archives of fear to uncover the truth behind the lighthouse that never sleeps. In December 1900, the small island of Eilean Mòr, part of the remote Forgotten Isles, became the center of a chilling mystery. The 3 lighthouse keepers stationed there, Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur, vanished without a trace. Their disappearance, still unsolved to this day, remains one of the most enduring maritime mysteries. When the supply ship Hesperus arrived on December 26th, bringing fresh provisions to the keepers, the lighthouse stood eerily silent. Joseph Moore, the man sent ashore to check on them, felt a foreboding sense of dread as he climbed the steep path to the lighthouse. What he found inside was deeply unsettling. The place was in perfect order, the lamp cleaned and ready for use, but the keepers were gone. The logs revealed strange entries in the days leading up to their disappearance. Marshall had written about a storm that didn't match known weather patterns, mentioning strong winds and heavy seas. The final entry, made on December 15th, noted that the storm had abated and everything was calm. After that, silence. An official investigation concluded that the men had likely been swept out to sea while trying to secure equipment during a storm, but several oddities challenged this theory. The weather had been calm when the men were last seen, and the logs indicated only mild tension among the keepers, not enough to suggest they would take such a dangerous risk. The mystery gripped the public's imagination, with theories ranging from the mundane to the supernatural. Some said the men had been taken by a rogue wave. Others whispered of spirits, sea monsters, or curses tied to the remote and desolate isles. Joseph Moore couldn't shake the feeling that something had been overlooked in the investigation. Volunteering to join the next crew to man the lighthouse, he returned to Eilean Mòr in January 1901 alongside 2 new keepers, John Craig and William Mackenzie. Though the official records suggested natural causes for the disappearance, Moore suspected something more sinister. From the moment the men set foot on the island, the atmosphere felt oppressive, as if the land itself carried the weight of the mystery. Days passed in relative calm, but Moore's unease grew. Each night, as the wind picked up, he began to hear faint whispers carried on the breeze. At first, he dismissed them as the island's eerie acoustics, but the whispers persisted, becoming clearer as the nights wore on. He struggled to sleep, waking in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, convinced that someone, or something, was outside the lighthouse, watching them. He kept these fears to himself at first, unwilling to alarm Craig or Mackenzie, but the longer they stayed, the more the island's presence seemed to take hold of them all. As time went on, the whispers became louder, more distinct. Moore began to hear his name being called, faintly at first, but unmistakable. The voices seemed to come from the sea, or from the cliffs, as if the missing keepers were calling to him from beyond. One night, unable to bear the whispers any longer, Moore ventured outside in search of their source. The wind was fierce, the mist thick, and as he reached the western cliffs, the place where the iron railings had been twisted and bent, he thought he saw movement in the fog. But when he raised his lantern, there was nothing there. Desperate for answers, Moore confided in the other men. Mackenzie, though skeptical at first, began to experience strange occurrences of his own. Objects went missing and reappeared in odd places. He too began to hear the whispers, though he dismissed them as tricks of the wind. Craig, ever the pragmatist, tried to keep order, but even he could not deny the growing tension among them. He had seen men crack under isolation before, but this was something different. An unseen force seemed to be pushing them toward the brink. One stormy night, Mackenzie, while on watch, glimpsed figures standing on the lighthouse platform. He was sure it was the missing keepers, their spectral forms shrouded in mist. Terrified, he called for Craig and Mòr, but when they arrived, the figures were gone. Though Craig tried to reassure Mackenzie that it was just a trick of the light, he too was beginning to feel the island's influence. The tension reached its peak when Mòr, the most affected by the whispers, became convinced that the island was calling him. He spoke of the keepers in the past tense, as if they had never left. He started spending long hours at the cliffs, staring out at the sea, muttering to himself. The whispers, he claimed, had grown louder, and he believed the missing keepers were waiting for them. The final straw came during a fierce storm in late February. Craig, who had been on watch, suddenly heard his name being called from within the lighthouse. He turned to find Mòr standing at the top of the stairs, his face pale, his voice flat. "It's time," Mòr said. "They've called us." Terrified, Craig tried to reason with him, but Mòr's mind was already gone. He spoke as though the missing keepers were still alive, waiting for them to join their ranks. Craig, realizing that Mòr had succumbed to whatever haunted the island, raced to find Mackenzie. Together, they tried to stop Mòr from leaving the lighthouse, but he was determined. As the storm raged outside, Mòr led them to the cliffs, where he stood at the edge, looking out over the roiling sea. Craig and Mackenzie pleaded with him to come back, to wait for the Hesperus that would soon bring relief, but Mòr was beyond saving. With a final eerie smile, he stepped off the cliff and disappeared into the mist. When the Hesperus arrived the next morning, it found Craig and Mackenzie huddled in the lighthouse, both men in a state of shock. They told the captain and crew what had happened, though neither could fully explain the events that had led Mòr to his death. The disappearance of the original keepers was never solved, and the events that followed Mòr's return to Eilean Mòr only deepened the mystery. Some believed the island itself was cursed, that it held a malevolent force that drove men to madness. Others speculated that isolation, combined with the harsh conditions, had simply broken the minds of those stationed there. But for those who had been to Eilean Mòr, the truth was far more unsettling. The island wasn't just isolated, it was alive, its whispers echoing in the wind, its secrets buried beneath the mist and sea. The lighthouse stood tall, its beam cutting through the fog, a beacon for ships navigating the treacherous waters. But for those who knew its story, it was a tomb, a monument to the men who had vanished, and to those who had nearly followed them into the abyss. The story of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the sea, a chilling reminder of the dangers of isolation, the power of nature, and the unknown forces that may still lurk in the world's darkest corners.